Good afternoon, friends. I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC, welcome you all to yet another pursuit to organize vivifying webinars by which we can all learn during these times. And as those who have already been connected with us know that we have been conducting webinars during these testing times, and the webinars have been by the speakers who are erudite and have immense knowledge. In pursuit to that, amongst us, we have Honorable Dr. Justice S. Vimla, former judge of the Madras High Court. Her passion towards learning and teaching is a perspective to be learned by all of us. She did her PhD while she was in service. That shows that her passion for studying was always there. And she had also been the first woman judge who became a director of a judicial academy. Speaks what we have taught, what we are speaking about, the fact that she has immense taste and flavor for teaching. As we said, that the pursuit is to find the speakers who can give insights on different issues which invariably, as a common man, as a student of law, as a lawyer, or as a judicial officer, one knows it. And her lordship had also written a book, Whether Winning a Case Means a Success in Life, which automatically, once we examine that aspect, it gives us that we should ask your lordship that what actually gives a person the feeling of success, and what was her experience when she wrote this book, and what was the feedback, besides the fact that while teaching, everyone has taken keen interest on that. Without taking much time, I would request your lordship to give the insights on the subject of jurisdiction of civil court with special reference to bar of jurisdiction. As we all know that this is the common perspective of law, while we are dealing matters as to whether it will go to the civil court or whether the bar imposed under the some specific statute does change the tenor of the case, etc., etc. Over to you, lordship.
Good afternoon to Vikas and all our friends. Speaking through technology is very, very difficult for me because I always speak depending upon the feedback that I get from the participants through their body language. From the video also I can get the body language, but still we are not accustomed to using too much of technology. Therefore, if I am not fluent, kindly bear with me, number one. Number two, my preparation with regard to this subject is extremely basic, taking into account only the beginners and the students. Therefore, those seniors who are well versed in civil law may kindly excuse me for the basic presentation on CPC. But I would say that I was really wondering whether so much can be spoken about CPC. I would simply say, if you have a balance, you can put section 9 CPC in one plane and the rest of the provisions in the other plane, both will be equal. To that extent, section 9 is very, very fascinating. And as we go on reading, every time I read section 9, I get a different meaning, and it is so elastic. It was a very fascinating experience for me to read section 9 itself. That was very, very nice. Number 3, Vikas is doing a very good job, appreciated by one and all. And only to appreciate him, I'm putting this first slide that is on power of literacy. When I talk about literacy, I am not talking about the basics of learning ABCD of the starting point of literacy. It is a literacy throughout life. Literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. This is especially applicable for lawyers. What would be a misery for us to appear before the court would be a hope if we are literate on any particular subject or particular.
And just 1 minute, we are allowing that screen sharing for you. because
Yes.
screen sharing, we are allowing. You're saying you're sharing a
Screen,
screen.
screen sharing
Yes.
is not, oh.
Yeah. I realize that because
One
invariably
second,
speakers are.
one
Yes.
second, 1 second. Where is screen sharing?
That's on the bottom. You will find participants, chats, and a screen share. Share screen.
Share screen.
At the bottom, it should be there because invariably on Zoom application, it's at the bottom.
I'm just trying. It is not here. No, I have seen, I have shared the screen when I was presenting domestic violence. Now I find it. Yes, sir. It is screen sharing is there.
I'll just check.
I have just put on screen sharing. It's coming.
I'm just checking because it's not there.
Screen sharing. Share the போட்டிருக்கேன் share scare இதானே இதானே
screen
கொடுத்திருக்கேனே
Yes, it started.
Started?
But it's not come, it's colored, but yes, it has started. Otherwise, it was coming that Justice Bimla.
It is visible or not visible?
I will just check. Yes. It's visible, ma'am.
Once.
Presentation open.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, ma'am. It's come power of literacy. Literacy is a bridge from misery to hope.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
You will have just because the entire series of this thing is there. So that
Yes,
you
yes.
can hide. Just make one visible at a time.
No. If all slides are visible, I'll be more happy. But I could have colored it, but there is no time left for me. Literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. It is a tool for daily life in modern society. It is a bulwark against poverty. Literacy is a platform for democratization and a vehicle for the promotion of cultural and national identity. Especially for girls and women, it is an agent of family health and nutrition. For everyone, everywhere, literacy is, along with education in general, a basic human right. What Mr. Vikas, our friend, is doing is providing the basic human right for all of us to learn. Only for this purpose, I have selected this slide. Literacy is finally the road to human progress and a means through which every man, woman, and child can realize his or her full potential. I am confident, I am sure, I can assure that if this kind of webinar on the very important topics are taken, it will certainly ensure the human progress for every lawyer, and it will ensure justice for every one of us. Therefore, I thought it is time to congratulate Mr. Vikas and also the participants who are making use of this opportunity. I have a basic question, very interesting question, and those who are interested can give some answers in the chat box. That will be a motivation for me to speak further. What is the most important or interesting drug in the world? What is the most important drug in the world? Any answer? Yes, as and when it comes, I will answer that. The lawyer's duty, how the lawyers should have the perception regarding the job they are doing. I would start with a story. 3 masons were constructing a compound wall for a school. A passerby was wondering whether 3 persons is required to build such a small compound wall. He asked each one of them the same question, "What are you doing here?" The first mason said, "I am earning my livelihood. My family will be starving. Therefore, unless I work here, I will not have any money to feed my family. Therefore, I am earning my livelihood. That was the first person who was answering. The second mason was telling, if somebody is putting the brick, I am putting the cement. All the three of them are at present, we are putting up the construction. We are in the stage of actual putting up. That is the second answer. The third mason was telling that I am putting up a protection wall for the future leaders. See the thinking of the third man. He said the students of today is the leaders of tomorrow. We want to protect them. Therefore, in order to protect them with the futuristic view, we are just planning and thinking how best we can build this compound wall so that it is protective for them, really protective. It is very constructive so that it is useful in future also. That is the answer of the third mason. See the three different answers. One is about the family there, not even in the place where construction is made. Second one is in actual place where the construction is made. And the third person is just thinking of the future, the futuristic vision. How are you going to ensure justice to such a large mass of Indian people who are waiting to get justice? It is in the hands of lawyers. The lawyers can be very proud of the fact that they are the large masses of people who are ensuring justice to people. Justice to people is the first promise of the Constitution. The very first promise in the Constitution is justice. Unless there is justice, there is no peace in the world. You are in the process of ensuring peace to the world. What is your duty? Your duty is two things. One is to speak up, and the next duty is to uphold the rights of the people who are coming you. Just I'm reading the first one. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. If there is something is not right, not fair, not just, your duty is to speak up. That is meant for the common man, common people, common to everybody. But the question is, when somebody comes and approaches a lawyer, somebody is trusting a lawyer, somebody is paying a lawyer to speak for them, what extent is the duty to speak up? That is what I want to highlight here. Duty to uphold rights. When the justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where their one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. The world is not going to be safe. The society is not going to be safe. The people are not going to be safe unless the lawyers community is going to uphold the rights and thus ensure justice to the society. That is the very beautiful job that the lawyers are doing. And therefore, it is our duty to learn the topic, learn the subject very deeply and very constructively also. I would also like to quote Magna Carta here, where the Magna Carta said, that I'm only reading the last two lines, to no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay right or justice. It is our duty to ensure that there is no delay in getting justice. If there should be no delay, what is our duty and responsibility? To ensure that if we are very thorough with the law with which we have to deal with, then it may not be difficult to do justice. I was asking a question, what is the most powerful drug in the world? Words are, of course, the most powerful drug used by the mankind. That is a quotation. Why words are, it is considered as a most powerful drug? Because it has the very persuasive value. We should develop our word power in such a way that we should be able to persuade, we should be able to convince, we should be able to communicate the grievances of our client to the court. That is how we will be able to get justice. Therefore, the words are very, very, very important. Use of words. Words are considered to be mysterious contrivance of communication in our everyday life. Powers of well-chosen words have the power to inform, influence, educate, and entertain others. This is the power of the words, and therefore it is our duty to see that in what context, in what is the text used, and what is the context in which the words are used, and how to interpret those words. Not even words, I will say even syllable is important. Even a full stop is important. A comma is important while we communicate things. Then I will just now be having considered our duties and responsibilities, and now we will consider why we are talking about the jurisdiction, how it is important. When we talk about the civil code, the first thing that would come to our mind is plaint. What are the particulars to be contained in the plaint? I am only reading the highlighted portion in the red color. F rule 1, rule 1 order 7 CPC, F, facts showing that the court has jurisdiction. Then the next is a statement of the value of the subject matter of the suit for the purpose of jurisdiction and of court fees so far as the case admits. These are all the all things are important, and especially when we talk about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is on 3 facets. Number 1, pecuniary jurisdiction. Number 2, territorial jurisdiction. Number 3, jurisdiction with regard to subject matter. These are all the 3 areas in which we will be talking about jurisdiction. Pecuniary jurisdiction, it is section 6, save in so far as otherwise expressly provided, nothing herein contained shall operate to give any court jurisdiction over suits, the matter or the value of the subject matter of which exceeds the pecuniary limits of its ordinary jurisdiction. There are some courts having the pecuniary limit. There are some courts, there is no pecuniary jurisdiction limits. That is why bracket if it is given as if any. Pecuniary jurisdiction, you know that the pecuniary jurisdiction for a municipal court is different, sub-court is different, and district court is different, and the high court is different. Certain sections we will rush through. We are going to see in detail only section 9. Because these things are very, very basic. You must be knowing just to have the continuity and the comprehensiveness and not to omit anything with regard to jurisdiction. I have put certain slides with regard to territorial jurisdiction also, which is running from 15 to 20. We will just rush through and we will consider in detail only section 9. Section 15, court in which suit to be instituted, these are all the bare provisions. Every suit shall be instituted in the court of lowest grade to try it. Section 16, suit to be instituted where subject matter is situated. See the opening line, subject to pecuniary or other limitations prescribed by any law. Subject to pecuniary limits, where the suit, the issues with regard to recovery of immobile property, partition of immobile property, foreclosure, sale or redemption, etc. For the determination of any other right or interest in immobile property, for compensation for wrong to immobile property, for the recovery of mobile property, these are all the categories of cases. They shall be instituted in the court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction the property is situated. Property is situated. Where the property is situated, we will be, the court will be having the jurisdiction. Then suits of immobile property situate within the limits of different courts. The highlighted portion will clearly show that if there are if any particular property is situated within the jurisdiction of different court, then it must, the suit may be instituted in any court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction any portion of the property is situated. That is very, very basic. Then place of jurisdiction of suits where local limits of jurisdiction of the court is uncertain. If there are grounds to have the doubt, then there is an uncertainty. A statement must be recorded to that effect by the court. And if the statement is not recorded at the time of institution of the court, institution of the suit, when it goes to the appellate court or revisional court, if the court believes that if there had been the fact that the uncertainty exists is not recorded, then Only if there had been a consequent failure of justice, appellate or revisional court will interfere and not otherwise. Therefore, you should insist upon the court that it is better to record the factum of uncertainty. Only for that limited purpose, I have put that. Then objection to jurisdiction. This is very, very important. When the objection to be taken, where to be taken, and how to be taken. If not taken, what will happen? These three provisions under section 21 is very repetitive in the sense the same language, same phraseology and same terminology has been used. Therefore, if we read one, that will be amount to reading all the three or remaining two also. No objection as to place of seeing, number one. Number two, no objection as to competence of the court with reference to pecuniary limits of jurisdiction. Number three, no objection as to competence of the executing court. These three things. Subject matter is not covered here. You might have noticed that. The objection must be taken at the first instance, at the earliest opportunity. Must be taken at the first instance, at the earliest opportunity, with regard to place of suing, with reference to pecuniary limits, and also with regard to execution. In all the three circumstances, first instance at the earliest possible opportunity. When it is to be taken, in cases where issues are settled at or before such settlement. Whenever we frame issues, it is not sufficient if we ask our clerk to scribble something on paper and leave it to the court. It is for us to look into the pleadings, plaint and the written statement, and then to have the issues framed properly depending upon the burden of proof also. At or before the settlement of issues, we are expected to raise the objection with regard to pecuniary jurisdiction or with reference to place of suing. Then the third thing is the objection could be taken before the appellate court or the revisional court only when there had been a consequent failure of justice. All the three conditions are all the three conditions must collide together, and unless all three conditions are established, we will not be able to succeed with regard to objection to jurisdiction. If we have serious objection, when it is to be taken, where to be taken, and what will be the consequence if not taken. These three things are very, very important. And we will also see a case law, how the case a partition suit started in the year 1938 in Kerala, ended in 1981. I have taken out the facts specially to ensure that if we want speedy justice, we must be thorough with the provisions of law. Only with regard to place of objection, only with regard to place of institution, objection was not taken, and how they were able to drag on the matter from 1938 to 1981, we will see at a later point of time. Now we are coming to Section 9 CPC. Section 9 CPC, I would say it is the panacea for all the remedies for all violations of the civil jurisdiction. But the way in which, the language in which it is couched is in such a way that at the opening, it seems to be that it is a very big reservoir is opened up. But at the same time, there are some restrictions, some kind of limitations that is placed. But the limitations are very, very expressive. We shall first read Section 9. The court shall, I have highlighted in 3, 4, 5 words in a 2-line or 3-line provision, CP, opening lines in the CPC. I would say it is like Tirukural. Tirukural may be in 2 lines, but when we start interpreting that, the interpretation will go to any number of pages. That is how Section 9 also appears to be. The court shall. I would also request each and every one of you to concentrate on each of the words highlighted here. The court shall have jurisdiction to try all suits of civil nature, excepting suits of which their cognizance is either expressly or impliedly barred. Unless there is an express or implied barring, all civil suits shall be tried by the courts. What is the difference between civil and civil nature? Why it did not say that all civil cases or civil matters shall be taken by the civil court? It say matters of a civil nature. Any special meaning is there. When it speaks about bar, it is very clear and very simple language. It says whether it is expressly or impliedly barred. Again and again, reading and again gave me very different experience for me. And I would also request you to go through section 9 once again. The court shall have jurisdiction to try all suits of a civil nature, excepting suits of which their cognizance is either expressly barred or impliedly barred. That is about section 9. What is the meaning of this section 9 has been very beautifully illustrated in the case of most revered PMA Metropolitan and others versus Moranmar-Marthoma. This is a very landmark case that is often quoted and often repeated provision. Only from this decision, I have highlighted those words. Number 1, the expansive nature of the section is demonstrated by the use of phraseology, both positive and negative. The earlier part opens up the door widely and the later debars entry to only those which are expressly or impliedly barred. They say that the provision is couched in both positive and negative language. When they say positive, they mean that all civil suits. Negative when they mean that when there is an express or implied bar. When there is a bar, jurisdiction is limited or jurisdiction is barred. And all suits. That is why they say it is both positive and negative. Number 2, the 2 explanations, one existing from the inception and later added by 1976 amendment, bring out clearly the legislative intention of extending operation of the section to such religious matters which right to property or office is involved, irrespective of whether any fee is attached to or not. Number 3, the language used is simple but explicit and clear. Number 4, it is structured on the basic principle of a civilized jurisprudence that absence of machinery for enforcement of right renders it nugatory. See the purpose of section 9 giving such a vast jurisdiction is now put in place in paragraph number 4, point number 4. Basic principle. If we say that we are a civilized nation, if we say that people are civilized, if we say that we are people attained civilization, our jurisprudence should also be a civilized jurisprudence. When we call a jurisprudence as a civilized jurisprudence is whenever it provides a machinery for enforcement of your right. It is not enough to give you right. It is most important that for enforcement of the right, you should render a machinery. If you are not giving a machinery for enforcement, then the existence of law itself is a nugatory. That is what is explained in point number 4. Point number 5, the heading, which is normally key to the section, brings out unequivocally that all civil suits are cognizant and barred. You may just recollect, bar of jurisdiction came whenever the new enactment came. Whenever a new enactment is brought into force, then there is a bar of jurisdiction is created. Let us see for an example, the Family Courts Act. When the Family Courts Act was brought into force, you may recollect that the scheme of Family Courts Act, the purpose for which the Family Courts Act was brought into existence, and the provisions of the Family Court Act are completely and totally different from the Code of Civil Procedure. The Family Court Act say it is not necessary that they should be governed by the Code of Civil Procedure excepting for a limited purpose. Excepting for a limited purpose, I underline that. Except for a limited purpose, the Code of Civil Procedure does not apply. Another thing is the court can devise its own procedure towards the purpose of fulfillment of the objective of the family court. See the benevolent provision. No court in this world will have such amount of jurisdiction. Court can devise its own procedure for the purpose of carrying out the purposes of the act. There are too many fascinating provisions under the Family Court Act. The scheme of the Family Court itself is the association of the welfare experts, family court experts, psychiatrists, psychologists, whomsoever is available in the world for the purpose of settling the issues peacefully and amicably between the parties. The family court has got power. Therefore, when the family court has got such facilities which are not available in the civil court jurisdiction is barred. There is an express bar, but to the extent indicated, there is a bar. Only in that way we should understand that all civil suits are cognizable unless barred. It is expressly or by necessary implication. Number 6, what is meant by it is explained further by the widening of the ambit of the section by the use of the word shall and the expression all sorts of a civil nature unless expressly or impliedly barred. Shall make it mandatory for the court to entertain your suit. Whenever a suit is filed, whenever a plaint is filed, the first return comes. Under what provision this is maintainable? Invariably, it is a bitter experience of each and every one of us when we are the lawyers. Whenever a plaint is filed, the first return is under which provision this is maintainable. I thought this section 9 must be taught to all the bench clerk who are associated with the courts, all the staff members who are functioning in the civil court. That is what I felt. See the next point. Each word and expression cast an obligation on the court to exercise jurisdiction for the enforcement of right. The word shall make it mandatory. No court can refuse to entertain a suit if it is of the description mentioned in the section. That is amplified by the use of expression, all suits of civil nature. See how they are combining the purposive interpretation for section 9, how all the shall, all civil suits, and the combination makes it imperative for the civil court to entertain or not to reject unless expressly barred or impliedly barred. See the beautiful language and the beautiful expressions used. What is the meaning of the word jurisdiction? The word jurisdiction is nowhere defined in CPC. CPC do not define that, but it has used the expression in too many places. The jurisdiction, the word is derived from the Latin word jus and juris, both means law. Dicta, you must have heard about dictation, this and that, too many on dicta. Dicta means to speak. It is an authority given to the court to speak. Authority given by the law. What is the authority given by the law to speak for the court? This is the simple meaning of jurisdiction. The very important point that I would urge you to take note of is, I will give you an example also. Whenever there is an express power given to the court, if this express power is to be used in the discharge of the duty of the court, there is also an implied power to do all the necessary things. This implied power, many times courts are reluctant to use, or many times lawyers are not asking for the exercise of implied power. When section 125 CRPC providing for maintenance came in the Code of Criminal Procedure, I'm giving this example because everybody would have come across the case of maintenance in their lifetime once or sometime or other. At the inception, when it was introduced in the Code of Criminal Procedure, there was no provision for the grant of interim maintenance. Now that the present amendment provides for grant of interim maintenance. Whenever interim maintenance was demanded, the immediate answer by the court would be, show me the provision, where is the power to grant interim maintenance. That had been an answer by the court. It is only Justice Krishna here for the first time, he made it to the whole world that whenever there is an expressed power, there is also an implied power which would enable the court to use the express power in a profitable way or a constructive way. He said, if a woman has to live till the end. If she do not die before getting maintenance, that is before the conclusion of the main case, it is essential that we should provide interim maintenance. That is what he explained it. It is well settled that when a power is given to an authority to do something, it includes such incidental or implied power which would ensure the proper doing of that thing. See, that is the purpose of the implied power. It is well settled that when a power is given to an authority to do something, that includes such incidental power or implied power which would ensure the proper doing of that thing. In other words, when any power is expressly granted by the statute, there is impliedly included in the grant, even without special mention, every power and every control, the denial of which would render the grant itself ineffective. Thus, where an act confers jurisdiction, it impliedly also grant the power of doing all such things, all such acts or employ such means as are essentially necessary to its execution. The next is there are several decisions which have recognized the implied authority existing in the court. And the last one is the one which I was referring to, the judgment of Honorable Justice Krishna Iyer, Savitri versus Govind Singh. This court held that the power conferred on the magistrate under section 125 CRPC to grant maintenance to the wife implies the power to grant interim maintenance during the pendency of the proceedings. Otherwise, she may starve during this period. Giving the purpose, the court as the Supreme Court has recognized the power implied authority of the courts to do justice. Then what is the meaning of civil? The word civil according to dictionary means, it is also not defined. According to the dictionary, it means relating to all rights relating to the citizen as an individual. This is how it is defined. Then I was just pointing out how the section uses the word civil nature instead of using the word civil alone. This is the distinction there. Those suits are cognizable which are not only civil but are even of civil nature. What is the speciality of the word nature? The word nature has been defined as the fundamental qualities of a person or thing, identity or essential character. The word civil nature is wider than the word civil proceeding. The section would therefore be available in every case where the dispute has the characteristics of affecting one's rights, which are not only civil, but also of civil nature. It is an expansive jurisdiction, expanding the word civil from civil to civil nature. Because the word civil nature is included, the incidental right relating to civil and the consequential right relating to civil nature can also be included in the definition. Then we come to the bar of jurisdiction. What is the scope of the bar? Whenever a suit is filed, whenever there is a provision available for bar of jurisdiction, whether the bar is applicable or not, whether the bar is really a bar in all sense, on all occasions or all contexts, whenever there is a simple provision visible to the eye, immediately the defendant jumps into and saying that there is a bar of jurisdiction. Therefore, court cannot look into this matters. That is how we see, that is the practical experience in the court. See what is the extent to which the bar operates, where the bar operates, what are the factors over which bar applies. There are too many niceties, too many nitty-gritties, too many distinctions, too many nuances to be looked into to see that whether really the bar operates. Bar operates only to a limited extent, limited by the context in which it is used. There are 7 principles that has been elaborated by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Dulabai. You can forget every name in the world, including that of your spouse and not Dulabai, if you want to practice on the civil side. But to that extent, I will go and say that it is too important to remember this Dulabai case. Dulabai is extensively considered in almost all cases involving issues regarding to jurisdiction. The 7 principles, what I have just taken down the exact phraseology used by the Supreme Court, and I have put it in this language. The number 1, where the statute gives a finality to the orders of the special tribunal, the civil court jurisdiction must be held to be excluded if there is an adequate remedy to do what the civil court will normally do. Supposing there is a special enactment, special kind of remedy is provided. The question is whether those remedy is adequate, whether it provides a solution for all the remedy, whether there is an adequate remedy, that is number 1. Number 2, whether there are all the remedies which a party seek is available under the special enactment. If the enactment do not provide for adequate remedy or alternative remedy, then if a particular party wants a remedy only in that particular context, then it is no answer to say that the civil court jurisdiction is barred. Number 2, when there is an express bar of jurisdiction of the court, an examination of the scheme of the particular act to find adequacy or sufficiency of the remedies provided may be relevant, but it is not decisive. See, every interpretation, only the adequacy of the remedy or the sufficiency of the remedy is a matter to be considered before we say that jurisdiction is barred. The general approach for any court is to entertain the suit, to give the remedy, and the barring the jurisdiction is an exception to the extent to which it is express or implied. That is what is stated there. Number 3, out of 7 principles, number 3 is challenge to the provisions of the particular act as ultra vires cannot be brought before tribunals constituted under the act. Even the High Court cannot go into that question on a revision or reference from the decision of the tribunal. See, kindly note, only in a case of we are talking about the High Court jurisdiction when a revision comes or a reference comes, not otherwise. All the constitutional validity will be decided by the High Court. Number 4, when a provision is already declared unconstitutional or the constitutionality of any provision is to be challenged, a suit is open. A writ of certiorari may include a direction for refund if the claim is clearly within the time prescribed by the Limitation Act. Dulabai case is a case under the Sales Tax Act, and it is a case from Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh government enacted the sales tax and which imposed sales tax only at the point of import, but not within the state. Therefore, that is how it came to be challenged, saying that there is no equality and Article 301 is not followed. There are too many objections were taken, where the constitutional validity itself was challenged, and the constitutional validity, the challenge raised was also upheld there. The question arose whether a suit will lie or a writ jurisdiction should lie. That is how this distinction has come. If you are going for a writ petition asking for refund of the tax already paid, if the court is going to say that the tax collected is illegal and therefore it must be refunded, then the question of limitation comes. Then the court held writ of certiorari if it includes a claim for refund, and if it is within limitation, it could be entertained. Otherwise, the parties must be driven to the remedy of replacing it by a suit. That is point number 4. Point number 5, whether the particular act contains no machinery for refund of tax collected in excess of constitutional limits or illegally collected, a suit lies. Number 6, question of correctness of the assessment apart from its constitutionality or for the decision of the authorities, and a civil suit does not lie if the orders of the authority are declared to be final or there is an express prohibition in the particular act. In either case, the scheme of the particular act must be examined because it is a relevant inquiry. Scheme of the act, we are very particular about that. Number 7, an exclusion of jurisdiction of the civil court is not to be readily inferred. This is what mainly several courts are inclined to do. Go for alternative remedy, go there, go here, this and that. An exclusion of jurisdiction of the civil court is not to be readily inferred unless the conditions above set down apply. Don't say that there is a bar. Your inclination must be to entertain it. Only in cases where the bar is very, very clear, under the bar, the required remedy is available to the citizen or client who are coming, only then you are justified in excluding the jurisdiction and not otherwise. Then how these kind of statutes providing for procedure must be interpreted. Statutes relating to remedies, that is social welfare legislation, that is what is meant there, and the procedure like Code of Civil Procedure must receive liberal construction. Why liberal construction? Especially so as to secure a more effective, a speedier, a simpler, and a less expensive administration of law. You might have heard that procedural law is handmaid of justice and not mistress of justice. But now the situation is who is powerful at home, it is a handmaid or mistress. And that is a different issue. But general saying is procedures are handmaids of justice and not mistress of justice, in the sense it shall not command us, it should obey us. Procedures are meant only for doing justice and not for doing injustice or making the procedures complicated. That is the function of procedural law. This is the case I was telling. This is the case relating to territorial jurisdiction, objection relating to territorial jurisdiction. It is Puttamma and others versus Kuntal Kutty, represented by legal representative, etc. Definitely legal representatives must come on record from the suit started in the year 1938, ended in 1981. It is a suit for partition of immovable property. When we talk of partition of immovable property, by consent, it may take how much time? 7 minutes? 70 minutes? How much of time it will take? It was suit for partition was initially instituted at a place called Parappanangadi. It is in Kerala. Final decree, preliminary decree was passed on 18 to 1940. That is within a period of 2 years, preliminary decree passed. Before the passing of the final decree, jurisdiction was redefined by the government and the court. Therefore, because of the redefining of the jurisdiction, execution or passing of the final decree application came to be filed in a different court. There are objections taken with regard to execution in the court where final decree application was passed. The executing court said it has jurisdiction and therefore it will proceed. When it went to district court and the high court, there is a different result came. The high court said the objection regarding jurisdiction is well taken, and therefore the new place, that is a court at Manjeri, will not have jurisdiction, and therefore final decree passed by court at Manjeri was set aside and it was remitted back. When it went to Supreme Court, the Supreme Court asked this question. No doubt the objection was taken in the executing court at the earliest point of time. But the other question is, where is the failure of justice? The important phrase is failure of justice. Where is the failure of justice? What is the failure of justice? We called upon, I'll just read what is there in the operative portion of the judgment. We called upon learned counsel for the contesting respondents to point out to us, even at this stage, any reason why we should hold that a failure of justice has occurred by reason of Manjeri having been chosen as the place of suing, but he was unable to put forward any. Supposing a matter to be dealt with by the labor court, if it is dealt with by the ordinary civil court, we can say that there is a failure of justice because the labor court provides for, before the labor court we could approach, we should go to conciliation officer, where the collective bargaining concept is agreed. to oppose the management might powerful management, the union as a collective mass will go and negotiate. Then there is naturally, when a civil court one-to-one adversarial jurisdiction comes in, certainly there is failure of justice. In this case, court at one place X, court in another place Y. The two courts are having the same set of jurisdiction, same procedure, same power. Where is the failure of justice? What is the failure of justice? This question was not considered by the High Court. Not considered. In view of the matter, we must hold that the provisions of subsection above made it imperative for the District Court and the High Court not to entertain the objection whether or not it was otherwise well-founded. Just because there is a provision, just because somebody has quoted this provision, whether you should entertain that. The Honorable Supreme Court said the Honorable High Court should not have entertained the objection. It has entertained the objection, upheld the objection, and has remitted the matter back to the court. That is how the Supreme Court was aggrieved. And finally, see the direction. Equal jurisdiction, as the proceeding for the final decree have been pending from 1966. We further direct High Court shall decide the appeal at the earliest possible in any case within 3 months from the receipt of records from this court. There is a direction to the High Court to dispose it off within 3 months. This is the order in 6/8/1981. Where when we started in 1938, in 1981, finish it within 3 months, matter remitted back. Where are we? What is the kind of justice we are giving to the clients? Why the clients will come to the court? They are seeking their own katta panchayat. They seek justice elsewhere. Somebody else is administering justice. Why we should do that? A simple objection with regard to territorial limits is taken. The simple question that is not considered by the higher forum, the Manjeri court, the district municipal court decided it correctly. The higher forum have not dealt with the question at all. That is the grievance of the Honorable Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, where is the failure of justice? A simple question, a single question should have altered the whole scenario. That is not done. Therefore, what I am trying to say is, if at all you have genuine jurisdiction regarding territory, take it at the earliest point of time. You please don't take that technical objection if there is no failure of justice. Lawyers are also officers of the court. Your duty is to assist the court in arriving at justice. And therefore, I would request that you please take note of all these things. Not only the courts, all are responsible for this kind of delay. It is not enough to say that we shall not delay justice. What we are doing, delay defeats justice. We should not be party to it. Then this is yet another case law with reference to subject matter of jurisdiction, how the bar operates, in which plane it operates, how without looking into the nuances or without looking into the interpretation, just because a provision for bar is there, thus that defense is taken. It is very, very important case under the Citizenship Act. And I have chosen this case law only to show that there is no freedom for us. There is no justice for us. There is no rights for us if we are not going into the purpose behind a particular provision. See, this case, very, very interesting question is raised here. The jurisdiction of the civil court to decide that question. One second. That slide should first, this provision we will see first. What is a section barring the jurisdiction of civil court? Section 9(2). If any question arises as to whether, when or how any person has acquired the citizenship of another country, it shall be determined by such authority in such manner and having regard to such rules of evidence as may be prescribed in this behalf. In this, with reference to this particular provision, when the question is whether, when and how any person has acquired the citizenship of another country, it shall be determined by such authority. Such authority provided under section 9(2) is the central government. If any question comes as to whether any person has acquired the citizenship of another country. The appellants stated in the plaint that they were citizens of India. Number one, they had not ceased to be such citizens. They said in the beginning of 1953, they went to Pakistan for a temporary visit without a passport, but they wanted to return when they were compelled to obtain Pakistani passport. Immediately the government filed objection saying that the civil court should not entertain the suit. Under section 9(2) there is a bar, and therefore the suit is not maintainable. That is what is the objection taken. The question is in this way. It is not only a question of acquiring the citizenship of Pakistan. What is the allegations in the plaint? In the plaint, they would say that they were the citizens of India. They have not renounced the citizenship of India, nor they have acquired the citizenship of Pakistan. They went to Pakistan without passport, and while returning, they had to obtain the passport of Pakistan. Otherwise, they would not be able to return to India where they had the citizenship. There is a distinction between acquiring citizenship of Pakistan, that is one part of it. The other part is, having regard to the pleadings, the other question is whether they are, first of all, they are Indian citizens, and whether they wanted to relinquish Indian citizenship, and only thereafter whether they are voluntarily they have acquired the citizenship. There are too many questions for which there is no jurisdiction for the central government to decide on those issues. Only with reference to acquiring citizenship of Pakistan, that is whether he has acquired the citizenship of Pakistan, the central government will have that jurisdiction. See, this is the order passed by this court, passed by the court with regard to jurisdiction. The jurisdiction of civil court to decide that question is not in any way affected by section 9(2) of the Citizenship Act. Therefore, it seems to us that the entire suit should not have been dismissed. The court below should have decided the question whether the appellants had ever been Indian citizens. If that question was answered in the affirmative, then no further question would arise and the suit would have to be dismissed. If it was found that appellants had been on January 26, 1950 Indian citizens, then only the question whether they had renounced the citizenship and acquired a foreign citizenship would arise. If those questions arise, those questions are not affected by section 9(2) and the suit would be maintainable. See, the finer nuances are missed out, then we are bound to land in trouble also. The next issue is, many a times whenever a plaint is filed, immediately objection comes when it should be taken up as a preliminary issue or when the issue should be taken up along with the trial. This is a main problem that is arising. This is answered by AR 1964, Supreme Court 497. When the question that is preliminary issue raised is only on a question of law alone, then it is for the court to take it up as a preliminary issue. If it is a mixed question of law and fact warranting taking of evidence, then the court must take it at the time of trial. This is the distinction that is pointed out in that decision. Then how do we determine the issue with regard to jurisdiction? What is the parameters or what are the documents that we can look into to decide the jurisdiction? It is only the plaintiff who is approaching the court, approaching the civil forum, saying that the civil court has got jurisdiction. Therefore, the decision reported in AR 1985 Supreme Court 577, 100 decisions earlier, 100 decisions later, all the decisions say it is the plaintiff that decide the forum. There is no denying the fact that the allegations made in the plaintiff decide the forum. The jurisdiction does not depend upon the defense taken by the defendants in the written statement. Exclusion of jurisdiction of the civil court is not to be inferred. Such exclusion must be expressly or impliedly barred, and etc. etc. The main thing is it is the plaintiff which decides the forum. Supposing the next question is whether by consent we can accept the jurisdiction. It is not so. No acquiescence or consent can give a jurisdiction to a court of limited jurisdiction, which it does not. Normally, when it comes to a question of consent, there is a distinction. By consent, we cannot confer jurisdiction. We will not, cannot, definitely consent cannot confer jurisdiction. But when there is a jurisdiction of different courts, the 2 to 3 courts, parties can agree that, parties can consent that which particular court will have jurisdiction. In other words, they can choose if there are several places available, but they cannot choose the original court which should try it. There is a distinction on that. There is one more decision which is practically, which must be useful for all lawyers. That is why I have chosen this, the very same proposition. It is only the allegations in the plaint that will decide jurisdiction. But does it mean that the stray lines in 1 or 2 sentences in the pleadings that should be taken, or the pleadings holistically taken, completely taken, or wholly taken? That is the issue that arose in that case. Mere phraseology or terminology used in the pleadings should not be taken to exclude the jurisdiction of the civil court. What it says is, parties do not have the foresight of prophets, and their lawyers the draftsmanship of Chalmers. In other words, what is stated is that give some allowance for rural pleadings. I'll just read this paragraph 2. In order to determine the precise nature of action, the pleading should be taken as a whole. The real point is not the stray or loose expressions which abound in inartistically drafted plaints, but the real substance of the case gathered by construing the pleading as a whole. Substance, see the substance. It is not the form, it is not the word. See the substance. Substance, whether it gives the color of a civil case or case of civil nature. That is what is to be construed, and not the way of taking it up only stray sentences or loose expressions, because the parties do not have the foresight of prophets or their lawyers the draftsmanship of a Chalmers. See the beautiful language, poetic language in which it comes to the rescue of the pleadings which are inartistically drafted. No doubt we should have drafting skill also, but sometimes by mistake, for want of time or want of complete instructions, sometimes for want of ignorance, out of ignorance or want of knowledge also, sometimes if it is inartistically drafted, but it has the substance, it is a case to do justice. Don't throw it away. Don't say that it will not come before the civil court, and please entertain that. That is what the Honorable Supreme Court has guided all the trial courts. These are all examples of a case of civil nature, damages, specific performance, specific relief, accounts, right to office, right to this, etc. These are all the decided cases from which it is called out what is not a suit of civil nature. Suits involving principally and exclusively caste questions, it is not a civil nature. Suit involving purely religious rites or ceremonies, not a civil nature. Suit for upholding mere dignity or honor, not associated with any rights. Suit for recovery of voluntary payment or offerings. Suit against expulsion from court, etc. These are all considered to be matters not arising out of civil court. Supposing there is no provision of law, no express bar, no implied bar anywhere, but there is no provision of law, what are you going to say? Can you throw out a case? No. The Honorable Supreme Court, after pointing out how the Indian legal system is, asked the court to do justice based on justice, equity, and good conscience. Sorry, there is a spelling mistake here. It must be equity, justice, equity, and good conscience. See the pride of Indian legal system. The Indian legal system is the product of history. It is rooted in our soil, nurtured and nourished by our culture, languages, and tradition, fostered and sharpened by our genius and quest for social justice, reinforced by history and heritage. It is not a mere copy of English common law. The sentence, this particular meaning of this entire observation is that don't quote English law or English common law, make use of English common law to say no to a litigant. It is not a mere copy of English common law. We have our own traditions. We have our own culture. We have nurtured and nourished our law in a very different way. We are concerned with the social justice. It is inspired, it is not a mere copy of English common law, though inspired and strengthened, guided and enriched by concept and precept of justice, equity, good conscience, which are indeed the hallmark of the common law. We can use this equity, justice and good conscience as used in English common law. And if further, justice could be rendered by using any other concept that is used in Indian culture, you are at liberty to use that provision also to do justice. That is what is stated by the Honorable Supreme Court in this decision. Therefore, by the overall considerations with regard to the jurisdiction of civil court is as far as possible. You exercise the jurisdiction, infer jurisdiction, and you are not expected to say that there is no jurisdiction, therefore go out. It is not for you to exclude people from the docket, not for you to exclude people from the access to court. You don't say that there is no access to justice for you. Access to justice is the right of any citizens of this country. That is how Section 9 in a mandatory language, a duty is enjoined upon the civil court to entertain all suits of civil nature and therefore say no to litigants. That is what I have understood from Section 9. And I think if any query, I will answer that. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The insights to as what you said, that it looks at the first brush that it's a very narrow scope, but once you start examining it, the question of jurisdiction is quite intruding, and it actually goes to the root of some matters, and some matters can be dismissed simpliciter on the ground of jurisdiction only. As on time, we have one query by Vishal Bede. It's at 459. If a family court exists in a particular district in same campus as other courts, then how is the family case from other district on application from the wife to High Court? Then the case is transferred, but not to the family court, but instead to a session court. This is a marriage petition. Is there some loophole, or is the court administration not working properly?
No. It is, the question is in the chat box.
Yes, ma'am. 458. 458. It's just posted right now.
Please post it, sir.
Ma'am, it's already posted. 458 by Vishal Bade. I can ask him to post it again.
Yes, sir.
Or I will copy it and post it.
Okay. Whether I have exceeded the time, sir?
No, it's fine. Meanwhile, I will ask Vishal to repost it. ASB says that the plaintiff native and bank account is in Kerala, and thereafter he is residing in Bangalore. That place he's transferred to. That place he transfers to the amount in mode of online transaction. So he could suit which place?
He could.
That question, that's not the way it should have been. It says the plaintiff native and bank account has a Kerala. Thereafter he is residing in Bangalore. That place he transfers to the amount in mode of online transaction. So he could suit which place? That's not happily worded. I think he wants to speak that originally he has an account in Kerala, but thereafter he shifts to Bangalore. and there is some online transaction made there. So from which place the jurisdiction would be, whether it will be in Kerala or Bangalore,
No,
on an
what
online
if-
transaction.
See, it's all depends upon the cause of action. What is the cause of
Online transaction.
online fraud or what? Online
That-
transaction different. What is the grievance against whom?
It should have been online fraud because that question is not forthcoming in real time.
Online fraud jurisdiction will be decided under the Information Technology Act because it involves technology transfer.
And Vishal Wadale says, if a family court exists in a particular district, in
Yes.
some same campus as other courts, then how is the family case from other district on application from the wife to a high court? The case is transferred, but not the family court, but instead to the sessions court. This is a marriage petition. Is there some loophole? He wants to say that there is a case in the family court, and once the high court, he moves and the other party has moved an application to the high court for transfer of the matter. So
I think when the family court is there, no other court will have jurisdiction. It should not have been transferred to the sessions court. The order, if it is passed even by the high court, it should be matter. It's a matter to be challenged. It cannot go to a sessions court.
this is by Naveen Kumar. He says, in service matter, the contract of employment is usually one-sided. The contract says that any service dispute shall be resolved by a court having jurisdiction. In his case, he's saying in Delhi, where the headquarters of the company is, but the employee is working in a branch of the company in Madras. Where would the jurisdiction lie?
Branch is at
Madras. And the head office is in Delhi. And
What-
in the contract, it is mentioned that the jurisdiction would be at Delhi itself.
What is the grievance?
So let's assume he wants to file a case against the company.
For
Whether
what? For what?
Naveen, you could repost that question. Where do you, for what jurisdiction he wants to say?
It is mainly the cause of action. No, what is he may ask for damages or he may ask for reinstatement or it depends. Too many if and buts are in between.
Then I will check as to whether we have on Facebook also.
Or ask him to get the details by email. Complete details are required to find out which place will have jurisdiction. Facts are not completely placed.
It says service matter relating to working conditions.
Service matter, what?
Let's assume I go a step further. Maybe he's wanting to say, let's assume his services have been terminated. And under the contract, it has been mentioned that the jurisdiction would lie at the head office. Can he file in the Madras stating therein that his services have been terminated there?
No. At which place his at which
Head office is in Delhi.
No.
The cause of termination is in Madras. He
which
says
place? Which
Madras.
place
He's
which
putting
place
up in
he was-
Madras, and his services have been dismissed in Madras.
At which place he was working at that time?
Madras itself.
At Madras court alone will have jurisdiction.
No, he says the employee has signed with the employer to the effect that he has come to the jurisdiction by writing that the jurisdiction would be at Delhi alone, being the head office.
When there is a private contract between the parties and there is an enactment providing for jurisdiction, it is only the law providing for jurisdiction which will prevail. By consent of parties cannot confer jurisdiction to any court.
Then this is about Citizenship Amendment Act. After the announcement of CAA, has it been considered now by the authorities that the transfer of citizens has been? No, this is not with the topic.
I don't follow the question.
No, ma'am, that is not with the related with the topic itself. So I have not taken up the question.
Okay.
This is by Sunny. In a divorce petition, can the court in whose local jurisdiction wife works exercise jurisdiction provided that her matrimonial home is in different district?
I think the question should be little bit elaborate.
He says that in a divorce petition,
Divorce petition.
can the court in whose local jurisdiction wife work? He's saying
Wife
that
works-
wife is working somewhere and her matrimonial home is at a different place. So where will the jurisdiction lie?
What if, one thing I am not able to find out is what is the cause for, what is the cause or what is the grievance, what is the remedy that the party wants? Supposing it is a case of maintenance where she can file. Supposing she wants divorce where the marriage took place or where the last decided together. There are too many provisions conferring jurisdiction under two different circumstances. Where she is working, where she is last deciding together, what is the remedy she wants?
Ma'am, you can give this we can take as the last question. You can give hypothetically on both the situation. Let's assume for maintenance also and for the purposes of having a divorce.
What is it?
Since the question is, as you said,
Okay.
it's slightly vague, you can give on both illustration. Let's
Yes, sir.
assume that party wants to go on the assumption of maintenance, and let's assume they want to, she wants to file a case of divorce, where the jurisdiction would lie in both the cases.
Who wants maintenance? Wife wants maintenance.
Wife.
Husband wants divorce.
Yes. Let's assume hypothetically, it's this situation because the
Where
question
the-
is.
Where the marriage is. Supposing the case is on cruelty, where the act of cruelty was at which place, that place will have the court at that place will have jurisdiction. Supposing it's all depends what the facts.
I'm saying since they are not, the questions the way it should have been, they are not coming. We will close the webinar on this this alone. So you can give an illustration where there's a cruelty at the husband's place. Where will the jurisdiction rise, and the wife goes back to the matrimonial, back to her parental home. And number two is where will the maintenance lie, and if he has shifted to some other place.
Where the party claiming maintenance resides, they can file the case at that place itself, so far as maintenance is concerned. So far as divorce is concerned, it is only the cause of action. Where the causes alleged took place, that place, the court at that place will have jurisdiction.
No, let's assume he is presuming the cruelty at the matrimonial home, and then she says that she has shifted back to her place,
It is
back
only
to the parental place.
where
that
the
is-
cruelty took place, the courts at that place will have jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you, friends. As we had at the outset stated therein, that since ma'am is a erudite speaker, would be quite enlightened by the way she will be giving us the knowledge. And those who have stayed connected with us during this webinar, not only on this on the platform but also on the Facebook, would have definitely learned, and the messages which have poured it on the chat box actually reflects to the effect that people have enjoyed the webinar, because as my lords had said, that to the effect that section 9 at the first brush looks to be a very simplistic section, but it's quite deep in studies, and they always say that the more you deeper study, then you start analyzing in a more particular way, and the thought process and perspective improves. The way madam has given us the insights has definitely enlightened us, so much so one Uttam Kumar Das says that he's basically practicing in the labor court. But I have been immensely benefited from the insights given by you, and again a lot of this thing are coming. Those who have stayed connected with us for the first time on this webinar or otherwise and have not subscribed to our YouTube channel of Beyond Law CLC, they can do that, because all the webinars have been uploaded, and in fact today's webinar would also be uploaded on the YouTube channel, so you can have the insights to all the webinars which we have conducted so far. Tomorrow, keeping in view the latest Supreme Court judgment on the Hindu Succession Act, we would be having a webinar by Evolution of Devolution under the Hindu Succession Act, and none other by Mr. S. Srinivas Raghavan, the advocate from Madurai bench. So do stay connected with us tomorrow at 4 p.m. in our pursuit to have the webinars. Tomorrow at so I stand corrected, it's 5:30, because invariably we have at 4 p.m. on a weekday, but tomorrow we are having at 5:30. So do stay connected with us. Thank you, ma'am, for giving us the insights to a topic which is quite enlightening, and it's quite useful for day-to-day purposes of the students as well as the professionals as such. And as you had said, that we should, being an officer of the court, give proper assistance. And once the knowledge is in the right perspective, one can always have the better perspective of discussing the things, writing in the plain in the right sense. Thank you, ma'am. Everyone, those who have been watched, those who are watching us on the platform and on the Facebook.
Sir, I should thank you for giving me an opportunity to refresh myself and also for sharing some information with all of you who are in the public domain of defending people and getting them justice. It's a rare opportunity to see all of you, at least through technology, where nowadays, because of COVID-19, we are aloof for not seeing human faces at all. You have given me an opportunity to meet all the lawyers and students and those legal luminaries. Thank you for the opportunity.
We will in fact connect you for the main of your fortes, POSCO and POSH laws. We will definitely request you, and we will have insights from you on that particular subject, which is quite close to your heart. Everyone stay safe, stay blessed. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.